The best way to describe Anthony, David, and Jan are that they're my brothers. I met Anthony at LA Fitness because I noticed that he had a Teamster's bag and his dad was a Teamster leader.
I'm a third generation son of labor. My grandmother worked in a factory. My mother and father were both Teamster members. I don't think there's a trade that I don't have a family member in.
What's so big for me coming from a union background is what affects one member affects the entire membership.
A lot of people can relate to the issues that individuals deal with. We pride ourselves on empathy.
The big value that's always instilled in you if you grow up in a union household is the importance of brotherhood. People that lean on each other, that rely on each other.
When we were building this business, having that background and knowing what matters most to the union members is really what we use to drive and build out Retiree First.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News.
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
It's an October edition of the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. We welcome everyone into another hour of educational information, JDoc, and I think that's the best way to describe what we do every week with the Labor and Energy Show. We have two great guests that are going to join JDoc. We'll tell you about our guest in a moment. A reminder that you can download this episode of the Labor and Energy Show and also all of our previous episodes on Apple or Spotify. Just search the Labor and Energy Show. JDoc, how are you? So over to you.
Oh, fantastic. Lots to talk about. Like you mentioned, two great guests, Mike Butler, the Executive Director of Mid-Atlantic Consumer Energy Alliance, and Dr. Trevor Smith, who is the Chief Research Officer at WPA Intelligence. And so let me just say this. We've talked about electric vehicle mandates several times in the past. And what you're going to hear here, we're going to be talking about the Virginia situation and the Delaware situation, okay? And this is spreading like wildfire, and there's reasons why people have to take it damn serious. First of all, we love electric vehicles. It's awesome. If you can afford an electric vehicle, and you want to drive one, please, we totally endorse that. However, these are called electric vehicle mandates. A little bit different when you put mandates on the end of it, okay? Which means that certain states are mandating that by, for example, 2035, you'll only be able to buy an electric vehicle in their state. Now, let me just say something about this because we have to make people understand why they're so devastating. First of all, they take the choice out of the public's hands regarding the purchase of their vehicles, okay? We don't have the projected infrastructure to support the mandates as related to the EV charging stations, the carports. Okay, even as we obviously we don't have them now, but even as we project them as far away as 2035, the infrastructure is not projected to be there. Right now, it poses a major threat to our power grid. Okay, it will cost jobs to American people. The mandates, yes, right now, a mandate that is supposed to take place in 2035, which, by the way, they wean them down starting at specific points. Some states as early as, 2024. Okay, the refineries who refine the fuels for gas-powered cars will close. Jobs will go down with them. EVs are currently very expensive, and we don't anticipate them going backwards. So by the time the mandates get here, these are luxury cars. Automakers are losing thousands on every EV they make right now. Really importantly, China owns almost the entire supply chain regarding the manufacturing of the electric vehicles. The critical minerals for electric vehicle mandates, electric vehicle batteries are being mined in the Congo using slave labor. We had Siddharth Kara on the program. It's questionable that EVs are even more environmentally sound than gas-fueled cars. And that's good. That's a debate that's going to be moving forward. But either way, again, that's not a reason not to buy an EV. We're talking about the mandates. And you'll see that the general public has no idea what EV mandates are. Okay, so and the final thing we're going to talk about is people who live in states that adopt the California rule. Okay, automatically go into the EV mandates. We're going to talk about all that today, Joe. This list goes down, dozens past that, but we don't have the time right now. But we got two great guests that are going to talk about it.
You know where I stand on it, JDoc? Jobs, jobs, jobs. It's insanity to have a mandate. I can't put it in more simpler term than that. We stand against mandates. Get rid of all mandates. You want to buy an electric car? Great, go do it. But when you're gonna mandate me to buy it, I'm against that for the position of everything that you outlined, plus common sense. Common sense.
And the funny thing is, so by the way, Delaware and New Jersey are opting into the California rule, and we're going to talk about that California rule when we bring Mike Butler on the program. But fact of the matter is that, and we've had individuals, Jim Appleton, who's the president of New Jersey Car, represents the auto dealers. They're up in arms and in a panic because they know that people are going to just go to other states. Okay, so there's so many areas we're going to talk about. Let people make their own choice. Listen, I don't sacrifice jobs for the environment. We all care about the environment. But you mentioned it, Joe. Common sense and working together is what it's all about. Not, putting in a mandate on something that we don't even have the infrastructure for now. And our estimates and forecasts say we won't even come close to it. And they're unnecessary. So we got a lot to talk about.
Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. We'll get to our first commercial break. On the other side, JDoc will welcome in Mike Butler, the Executive Director of the Mid-Atlantic Consumer Energy Alliance. Back in a moment.
My name is Eleanor Northaft. My husband was in the union, Local 282. As I'm getting older, I would like somebody to fight for me. So I called up Retiree First.
Hi.
And I got Brooke.
So nice to meet you. I'm Brooke. I'm an advocate at Retiree First. I've been working with Eleanor for 3 years. She was one of my first calls. I helped her with transportation to her doctors, getting her glasses reimbursed.
Oh, they are pretty fancy.
I'm basically just answering any questions she has.
And I always have a lot of questions.
Not too many.
I have a friend there. I love it because I can depend on her to help me out in any situation.
Oh, I'm excited.
She always comes through for me.
If you own a company and you're not producing a podcast, you're missing out. The public consumes messaging when they're ready. Join the professional podcast network of companies and let Jacob Media Partners put you in the podcast arena. Come to our professional studio or we'll come to your place of business and professionally produce your company podcast. Call Jacob Media right now at 267-261-3428. 267-261-3428.
Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch action news live.
And the big story on Action News.
Plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on, always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey on the Jacob Media Network. We've got a great guest, Mike Butler, who is the Executive Director of Mid-Atlantic Consumer Energy Alliance. Mike, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me today.
It's our pleasure. Certainly, we've had your organization on the show before. I believe your colleague, Chris Ventura, who's the Midwest Executive Director, back at the beginning of July. But if you could just remind our listeners a little bit about what Consumer Energy Alliance is, and then talk about what your role is in the organization.
Yes, thank you. The Consumer Energy Alliance, we're the voice of the energy consumer. We're a national organization headquartered in Texas. I'm cover the Mid-Atlantic, so I live in Pittsburgh, and I cover Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, Delaware. And in short, to distill us down to a bumper sticker, we're about affordability and reliability for consumers. And most importantly, we're for jobs. So anytime there's a legislative or administrative proposal about energy, we weigh in and say, hey, what is this going to do for those three factors? What is it going to mean for reliability? What will it mean for affordability? What will it mean for jobs? To make sure that everyone has all the information available so they can make clear decisions and understand the consequences of those decisions.
Mike, we've covered this topic many times, okay? And it's why when we opened up the broadcast, and I don't know if you had a chance to hear it, but we talked about the impact that the electric vehicle mandates, will have, and are having, even just a conversation, has impact, okay? But remind and we know what's going on in Delaware, okay? Remind our audience of what the Delaware Governor John Carney and his administration are trying to do with the gas powered car ban.
Yeah, well, essentially, they're trying to get the entire state onto electric vehicles. They have a very aggressive mandate. That's an important word to talk about. It's a mandate, not a goal, not an aspiration, but a mandate. And that by the year 2035, which is really not that far away, that all new vehicle sales will be electric vehicles. In fact, by 2027, they have a goal to get it to 43%. But we'll get more into those numbers of how unrealistic those are. But that, in short order, is what it's all about. It is a mandate that is going to ban the cars as we know it.
And having said that, talk about the California rule that Delaware, New Jersey. We just had the one of the policymakers from New Jersey on the program, John Bersacelli, who opposes the mandates. And he is typically a supporter of the governor, but in this case, he's opposed these mandates, and we talked about that. Talk about what the California rule is and the fact that a ton of states are opting into this thing.
Yeah, in California, it's the same type of thing, a mandate to move toward off the internal combustion engine into electric vehicles. And given the size of California, it's its own country, be the sixth largest economy of the world. When California moves, a number of other states feel they need to follow it, particularly blue states. California becomes a trendsetter and a guiding light for others to think they need to replicate it. But we're already seeing real consequences of that. By the move to electric vehicles, you have other actors in the economy that have to respond to that. We may want to talk about this, but the Marathon oil refinery that shut down, 375 union workers lost their jobs. And that was a direct response to an EV mandate because the rest of the economy is responding to where they think the governor's taking them. And, we have a refinery in Delaware City, and it could be on the chopping block in the same manner.
It's interesting because when we had Jim Appleton on, who was the president of New Jersey Car, represents the auto dealers in New Jersey, all kinds of concerns, obviously. But the fact is that you're taking the choice out of people. Now, let me just state that I say this, and I'm dead serious about it. As much as, we represent the labor community and all that, we don't ever talk about sacrificing our environment for jobs, our planet. Okay.
Of course.
That's a given. Okay. But Joe Kraus said something interesting, and we hear it all day long. And our Energy Education and Awareness Initiative is all about this, and that is common sense and energy. Okay. And so there's a million reasons why the bans are impacting people as we speak. Okay. And we talk about this because we're broadcasting from where we're at in Pennsylvania, between Delaware and New Jersey, who opted into the California rule. So if we don't do something about it now and educate people and let them understand that why they got to get engaged, it could be a major problem in so many different areas. You mentioned that it is required in Delaware to reach 43% of new EV sales by 2027. When we talked to Jim Appleton, he flat out said to us, people will just go to other states to buy their automobiles. You're taking the choice off of them, and they're going to get educated at that point. Wait till we bring on Dr. Trevor Smith in the next segment. He's one of the nation's leading pollsters, okay? And he'll talk about what people think about, these mandates, and a lot that they don't know and that they didn't know, but what their opinions are when they finally find out. So the information you and I are talking about right now, probably, the majority of Delawareans don't even know about them. So you mentioned 43% of new EV sales by 2027, which is right around the corner. A, how will that happen? And B, are we even ready for that?
Let me be very clear. No, it will not happen. And I'll tell you a very simple number why. Currently, it's 3.75%. 3.75% of new sales. We're not going from 3.75 to 43 in 4 years. I mean, if it increased by 50% a year, we'd be at 7.5%. Nowhere near. I mean, we're not even on the fringe of that number. So it's completely unrealistic. It's just really at this point, I would consider it a ludicrous target to try to reach.
And I'm being a little sarcastic when I say, are they going to have the mandate police? Knowing when your lease is up, or
But that's a great question. How do you make a mandate real when the numbers are this far away? And again, given where Delaware is situated, it's very easy to just zip over the border to Pennsylvania, New Jersey. And why wouldn't you when the EV is $15,000 more than the average car? Again, I know you want to get into this. I'm not jumping ahead too much, but where are you going to charge your car? There's only 167 public charging stations for a state with over 800,000 licensed drivers. So it's not just the matter of how many cars can we sell in a time frame. It's how are we going to realistically have that fleet powered in a way that we're accustomed to and in a way that's affordable. The car is more expensive. The charging ports are more expensive. Building out that infrastructure, the consumers are going to bear that cost. So there are just so many factors that, again, it's all very well intentioned to be concerned and conscious about our environmental goals. But the United States already leads the world in emissions reduction. And we're on the cutting edge of the new technologies. I mean, we are going to be the ones that are blazing the trail ahead of a new and more vibrant planet. But these mandates are just backwards. They're the cart before the horse, and we're nowhere near. We're just nowhere near being able to pull it off. It's not even. It's so far apart. I don't even know how it's. The ink is still on the paper. On these policies is kind of outlandish.
No question about it. And the trickle effect, okay, with loss of jobs, taxes, the tax base, and all those situations that we can't even think about, okay, or talk about, in a 1 hour broadcast. We'd be going on so long, but this is just the tip of the iceberg on this. But when you talk about, you mentioned the chargers, okay, and the carports, okay, which take 20 minutes to an hour to charge. Now, I'm just going to paint a picture. And again, we're not discouraging electric vehicles from coming into the markets, okay? By the way, one of the great conversations that we talked about with Jim Appleton was hybrid cars, okay? You have the option to do both, okay? And I forget, Joe Kraus would remind me, but he said, it's a case where good is the enemy of perfect, or something like that is what he said when we talked about the different options. But could you imagine how long I do remember this, and I know I'm dating myself a little bit, but the gas lines in the 70s when the gas crisis was going on, okay, or when the Colonial Pipeline went offline. Imagine that it takes 20 minutes to an hour to charge your vehicle, okay? Now, you mentioned we have 800,000 licensed drivers in the state of Delaware, okay? Is that a realistic picture we're talking about here?
Well, that's a great example you brought up because, again, think of how quickly you can fill up your tank compared to charging the car. But it creates a whole other dynamic that because, in the 1970s gas shortage, it was only affecting really, the transportation sector. But if you have all these cars plugged into a grid, not only do you have the backlog of getting cars charged in a timely manner, but you put all this other stress of all your other electricity needs.
Yeah, the grid, right? I mean,
Exactly. So it's just it could very easily see a scenario where it's even more cumbersome and difficult and maddening than it was in the 1970s.
well, what's interesting is, in this conversation, I'm not a big fan of fear tactics or anything like that. I believe that we're going to, our technology is going to improve, and some of these statistics will change. But there's a lot of areas where we're headed for devastation. Okay, and what's scary about it is we have to touch the fire to find out. Okay, common sense is not prevailing. Okay, and people need to pay attention to this issue. Okay, because there are so many areas where there are pitfalls. Now, let's talk about that affordability situation. Okay, can everybody afford to buy a new EV? Well, if it was today or even 2027, the mandates aren't complete. Supposed to be total until 2035. But we've all seen the statistics with the CEOs. Their pay increases while the working people's pay since 1978. I don't have the stats here, but I'm not sure that wages are going to go up so high that right now the average EV costs around $60K. So I'm going to take a shot at this, and they're not going to stay at $60K. Okay, talk about that affordability, factor when it comes to regular people. The average, what does the average Delawarean? What's their average salary, and where's this thing going by 2035?
Yeah, the per capita income in Delaware is just a little over 38,000. Again, as you mentioned, EVs are currently 60,000. So those two numbers don't jive real well together. To your point, I'm sure as technology improves and production ramps up, that the prices of EVs will come down over time. But that doesn't necessarily bode too well for workers who have their prices aren't rising or wages aren't rising that fast. So you would have to come down very dramatically at a pace that doesn't seem practical to make it affordable to the everyday family.
And Mike, let me say now, I want to just remind our listeners, you're listening to the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. Our guest is Mike Butler, Executive Director, Mid-Atlantic Consumer Energy Alliance. Okay, our conversation is electric vehicle mandates. Okay, the word mandate, like Mike said at the beginning of the segment, you got to pay attention to that word. Now, one of the things I find interesting, Mike, is that, you and I both agree technology will improve. Some of the things that we're worried about will probably be remedied. There are so many concerns. Okay, but what ends up happening is we end up, the narrative, requires us to say, okay, well, technology will get better and all these things. But it doesn't allow our traditional energy industry to the same leeway. So, like you mentioned, America leads the world in emissions reduction. Okay, and a lot of our traditional energy companies, including our refineries and across the board in every area of traditional energy, have great solutions. Okay, to a lot of our energy problems. Okay, we don't give them the same leeway as we do when we're talking about these mandates. Oh, it'll work out. Oh, it'll do this. Why are we not working together with everybody to create common sense solutions? By the way, our traditional energy industry is, one of the most, robust industries in the world. We certainly, should be utilizing, their resources and working together. Having said that, you mentioned consumer demand. Okay, why aren't we just allowing, Mother Nature to take course and allow EVs to come into the market based on consumer demand?
Yeah, you raise a number of great points there, and that's our report. And you can, everything we're talking about, you can go online at consumerenergyalliance.org and read our report for Delaware and for the nation called Freedom to Fuel, because the market often does get us where you want to go. Again, you may not get there by the same year that the policymakers would kind of pluck out of thin air, but it can get you there. And for the reasons you laid out is, the technology and the competitiveness of the market really creates opportunities for people to innovate. And we've seen that time and time again in our industry. And again, we have the most productive workforce in the world by far. You put American ingenuity with our workforce together, we can get there. And there are breakthroughs happening in the traditional energy spaces that are revolutionizing the world with carbon and capture and sequestration, for example, hydrogen technologies. There'll be hydrogen hubs that the Biden administration is supporting that will, and particularly in our region where natural gas, we'll have blue hydrogen, much cleaner, much more dramatic, and what can meet our energy and electricity needs. So those things are happening, and they're happening because, again, we want to be good environmental stewards. But the way to do that is through the market, through ingenuity, through our workforce, and not through government mandates.
And so we're going to kind of spitfire a little here because we only have about 6 minutes left in the broadcast. But how would the car ban impact Delaware's only refinery in Delaware City?
Well, that's deeply concerning because, again, I kind of mentioned, just alluded to it earlier, but we had it play out in California. It was 375 union jobs, Marathon Oil Refinery. A year after that refinery closed, 25% of those workers are still out of work. And of those that did find new jobs, 24% lower salary than they were making. Those are devastating numbers to me. And again, there's no need for it. It's getting the cart before the horse. These workers should not be sacrificing their jobs for, again, mandates that are kind of picked out of thin air as to why we have to do it by 2035, as opposed to, again, as you said, when Mother Nature takes its course, we'll be there. But for these families to lose those jobs or come in with wages that dramatically lower than they were, we just can't afford to have that happen.
Yeah, and people who think
right.
the transition into renewable jobs, and no one's against the renewables coming into the market. They're coming, and that's a fact. But we've had Sean Steffi on the program, who's business agent up at Boilermakers Local 154. Okay, and he went to a renewable job fair, and the jobs that you talk about the transition. If somebody was talking about that, $16 an hour, and I always sarcastically say I love a job where you got to be on public assistance. Okay,
Right.
we'll work 40 hours a week. Let's talk about energy security. Okay, how will it impact our region's energy security on a broader scale? What about on our national security? Okay, and are politicians in the state aware that the entire supply chain of these cars is currently controlled by China? Okay, I mean, it's like being in the Twilight Zone.
Right. I mean, we spent decades getting ourselves off of a situation where we were dependent on OPEC oil cartel, and now we are deliberately putting ourselves dependent on the Chinese Communist Party. It's insanity. I mean, it does. Again, we are an energy superpower. The United States of America is an energy superpower. This region of the country, close to the Marcellus Shale, an energy superpower. The fact that we're going to deprive ourselves of this deliberately, intentionally, is mind-boggling. And our policymakers have an obligation to be aware if they're not. I mean, that's not an excuse. I mean, if you're going to make these policies, you better be aware of all the very foreseeable consequences. And again, as you said, renewables are an important part of an all-of-the-above energy strategy. And all-of-the-above energy strategy is best for consumers, it's best for workers, it's best for our national security. But that being said, we have to take into account that the way supply chains are, where critical minerals are controlled, that's China. And that is not changing the foreseeable future. So to jeopardize ourselves, again, for misplaced mandates is it's just very hard to rationalize why we're doing this.
Shooting ourselves in the foot. We should be working together, okay, and doing everything we possibly can, okay, to utilize every resource in all of our energy communities, renewable community, traditional energy, labor, our political leaders, but that's why it's so important right now to understand. Listen, you talk about the Chinese Communist Party. I don't care if it's, Spain, for crying out loud. We're sacrificing everything, let alone to potentially our sworn enemy, and shutting ourselves down like unbelievably. Okay, and then by the way, we're still going to need. So after the refineries are gone and all of our traditional energy resources, due to these mandates, large port, like you said, plenty of refineries have closed. We're still going to need the refineries, so we're going to be importing these fuels from these foreign countries. That's not going to stop.
No,
So,
we had that a few years ago in Boston. They were importing oil from Russia. Just again, you can't get a pipeline from Pennsylvania to New England, so we have to get it from Russia. I mean, explain to me how that makes any sense. How's that better for the environment? And it's definitely not better for American workers.
No question about it, Mike. And one last question, because we only got less than a minute left. You think this is a blueprint, or at least the first steps in a nationwide push to ban gas-powered cars and mandate EVs?
Yes, this is the tip of the iceberg. They're going to get more aggressive, but that's why it's up to us to educate your listeners, and for them to educate their state representatives, their governor, to say, hey, we don't want this. We need to think about this in a more thoughtful manner, a more practical manner, and let's ease up here and get ourselves on a more rational approach.
Mike, real quick, what can Delawareans do? Okay, and you just sort of touched on it, but what can they do to voice their opinions on this?
They have to make themselves heard. They have to get themselves educated. And again, there's still time to turn this around, and their local elected officials are the best course of action to get to their attention fast and say, this is not what we want. And I know you're going to talk to the pollster, and he's going to share some light of how we know this is not what they want, and we know it's not practical. So they've got to engage with their lawmakers and get this turned around.
Mike Butler, Executive Director, Mid-Atlantic Consumer Energy Alliance. We want to thank you for being our guest on the Labor and Energy Show. We appreciate your time and your insight. We'll have more from the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey in just a minute.
Welcome to Pond Lehocky, the largest workers' compensation law firm in Pennsylvania. With over 250 years of combined courtroom experience, we've helped over 100,000 injured and disabled workers obtain benefits, as well as some of the biggest settlements in the state. Even better, Pond Lehocky doesn't charge a dime until you win. If you've been injured at work, give Pond Lehocky a call.
The best way to describe Anthony, David, and Jan are that they're my brothers. I met Anthony at LA Fitness because I noticed that he had a Teamster's bag, and his dad was a Teamster leader.
I'm a third-generation son of labor. My grandmother worked in a factory. My mother and father were both Teamster members. I don't think there's a trade that I don't have a family member in.
What's so big for me coming from a union background is what affects one member affects the entire membership.
A lot of people can relate to the issues that individuals deal with. We pride ourselves on empathy.
The big value that's always instilled in you if you grow up in a union household is the importance of brotherhood. People that lean on each other, that rely on each other.
When we were building this business, having that background and knowing what matters most to the union members is really what we use to drive and build out Retiree First.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
For the big story on Action News,
search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
And back here on the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. Good conversation with Mike Butler, the Executive Director of the Mid-Atlantic Consumer Energy Alliance. We'll pause. JDoc coming up on the other side. We'll go one-on-one with Dr. Trevor Smith. A reminder to download the Labor and Energy Show from where you consume your podcast on Apple or Spotify. You can listen to all of today's show, or you can educate yourself by listening to one of our many shows. We are now in year 2 of the Labor and Energy Show, and we continue to educate the public. JDoc will be back with us on.
If you own a company and you're not producing a podcast, you're missing out. The public consumes messaging when they're ready. Join the professional podcast network of companies and let Jacob Media Partners put you in the podcast arena. Come to our professional studio, or we'll come to your place of business and professionally produce your company podcast. Call Jacob Media right now at 267-261-3428. 267-261-3428.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
For the big story on Action News,
search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
Welcome back to the Labor and Energy Show on the Jacob Media Network. We want to thank Mike Butler for being our guest in our first segment. Mike is the executive director, Mid-Atlantic Consumer Energy Alliance, and I'm extremely excited about our upcoming segment with Dr. Trevor K. Smith, Chief Research Officer, WPA Intelligence. Dr. Smith, how are you, sir?
Good. How you doing, Joe? Nice to meet you.
A pleasure's mine, and we really appreciate your time. I want to kind of set this up for a second. By the way, Dr. Smith is one of America's most highly regarded pollsters, and so we bring his expertise into this conversation. But I want to set this up, okay? So the issue in 2021, former Virginia Governor Ralph Northam passed legislation requiring the Commonwealth of Virginia to become a California state, according to Section 177 of the Clean Air Act. Because of this law, Virginia is required to adopt California's electric vehicle mandates, as well as California's even more recent and aggressive bans on the sales of new gasoline and diesel vehicles. Okay, the current governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, has made a repeal of this law his priority and for his administration. But in his last legislative session, his repeal bill was defeated by a single vote in the Senate committee. So without the repeal, California's EV mandate will begin taking effect in January 2024. And the California's ban will begin phasing in the years after that until the full ban of sales of new gasoline and diesel vehicles is reached in 2035. Okay, Dr. Smith, if you will, just briefly tell our listeners a little bit about what WPA Intelligence, is, what the organization is, and a little bit about what your role is there.
Yeah, sure. So we're a political polling firm. So we work for a lot of campaigns and candidates. In this case, we didn't. It was a completely different organization trying to help people get elected to public office. We do a lot of polling and analytics, combine them. I think we're one of the few firms that actually does both of them and combines them. My role is I work with clients around the country, and I still help our staff try to learn how to do everything right. So
well, and having said that, and we kind of we set up the situation. Tell us a little bit about the polling you conducted recently in Virginia, and where Commonwealth residents stand on the issue of banning the sales of new gasoline and diesel vehicles.
Yeah, sure. So we fielded a survey in late August for an organization called the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. They were just trying to get a sense of where constituents were on this issue and the awareness of it. And so was I, quite frankly. I hadn't known prior to talking with them that Virginia had decided to go the way of California and ban gas-powered vehicles in a few years. Now, I'll tell you, once constituents became aware of what happened in the survey, and I try to approach all my surveys without any bias, is I think a lot of people, a lot of pollsters, quote unquote, do that to get the results they want, and there are many ways that they do it. So I just explained what the 2021 law was and asked if they were aware of it. And after I explained the law in the survey, and again, without any bias, almost 2/3 of Virginians in these districts oppose it, with the majority, 54%, strongly opposing it. And I forgot to mention, I conducted the surveys in competitive, in what people think are the most competitive state Senate districts, 7 of them. These were not Republican strongholds where you would expect really strong opposition to be high. No, the client was curious about the issue in some of the more competitive Senate districts in the state.
So let's talk about awareness, okay? I wonder how many people, if I walk down the street right now, knocked on all my neighbors' doors, okay, how many would know what an electric vehicle is? Let's say 98%, okay? There might be somebody hiding under a rock on a desert island, but other than that, but if I threw the word mandates, okay, and I'm in Pennsylvania, okay, Philadelphia, okay.
Great city.
Thank you very much. Go Phillies and Eagles. I know that we could lose some visit us quickly on that, on the other side of the state or up the East Coast. But anyway, you throw the word mandate on that, and let's talk about what you incurred in Virginia. How many people, when you've posed that question, and also throw on there the different methods of research that you actually talk to the people, but how many people actually knew what it was on a percentage basis?
Yeah, so awareness is extremely low in these 7 state Senate districts, and we're going to talk about some polls later nationally, but awareness of electric vehicles is really high, right? But not the mandate stuff. So oftentimes when you ask a question like this, like, are you aware of it? Respondents who don't want to sound ill-informed, a lot of them will say, yeah, I've heard a bit about it. So that some of that goes into like somewhat heard of. But the real number here is how many Virginians in these districts heard a lot about the issue, which is only 9%. So that just means that there's like no one keenly aware of it. So there's a lot of work to do to educate the public, in the upcoming elections in Virginia, and then as the mandates take effect over these next few years, Virginians won't be able to purchase new gasoline or diesel cars or trucks. It's going to be tough.
Okay, so and the methods that you did the polling in.
Yeah, so we did what's known as probability proportionate to size sampling. We take people's turnout scores. So say I was doing a survey in Pennsylvania with you in Philadelphia, everybody in that city would have a turnout score applied to them from 0 to 1. So that 0 to 1 score, closer to 1, you're more likely to turn out. So what we do, so let me step back a little bit. So in normal random dialing, random sampling, everybody has an equal probability of being selected for the sample. All the turnout score does is it kind of weights people's probability of being selected for the sample. So people with higher scores have a higher probability of being selected for the sample. Now you want to be really careful with that because you don't want to exclude people who have never voted before, because like in 2018, you saw this huge wave of turnout where a turnout model was actually probably pretty poor in predicting who was going to turn out because it's hatred for Trump, to be honest with you. So turnout was really high in 2018 for a midterm. So you just want to be really careful with that. So what we do is we do like a 75% probability proportionate size sample with about 25% registration-based sample. So we're calling people off the voter file, asking for their name, using this turnout score. And then we have stratifications of what the known universe is going to be. And then there's another thing called adaptive sampling that we do.
Okay, and when we talk about that, you mentioned, because this is mind-boggling, you mentioned that that there is a 9% awareness. I'm wondering, and I don't know if you got into this, but the people who have heard that are aware of the madness, of the people, the 9% that do, how many actually understand them and understand the impacts of them?
Oh, I would doubt that there's a lot of understanding of it. It's just like any public policy issue. There's often not a lot of understanding, especially with the 9%. They may have just, I've heard a lot about that. And it may be some bias into that where they may be people that are in favor of it that have heard a lot about it.
So once people understood in the conversation, okay, and by the way, it sounds consistent with the rest of the country, but where polls have been taken, the overall opposition for the vehicle bans was pretty consistent among the constituents you surveyed around the state. Okay, could you kind of repeat that, that number and kind of break it down for us?
Yeah, sure. So the overall opposition across all the districts, it was almost 2/3. I think it was 65%. And then the strongly opposing, it was 54%. Now, if you break it down by each of the state Senate districts, and again, there were 7 of them, there wasn't one state Senate district where opposition was at or below 59%, meaning that all opposition was above 60%. And even some of the more moderate or liberal type of districts, opposition was extremely high. So anything above 60%, 2/3, that's a lot. So to these constituents, this mandate represents, to me, I think, a very sudden change in their way of life, a forced change of behavior, and honestly, a more expensive change.
So you talk about, those type of numbers, 60%, 59, 60%. Okay. Is this an issue that could come up and be a factor in the upcoming elections?
So obviously, this is pure speculation. As the world events honestly can change elections so quickly. 2022, you had Roe v. Wade getting overturned. That changed a lot of things. Hatred for Trump again played into that election, but still, world events change things. I mean, look at the tragedy that just unfolded in Israel, and may God bless them. World events often dictate the conversation, whether we as political consultants like to admit it to ourselves or not. So the reality is, I have no idea what's going to happen by this time next year. Will the economy be in a recession? Well, Biden's often approval numbers of the incumbents are pretty predictive of what's going to happen. So Biden, I think, is in the low 40s right now, his approval. Will there be another act of aggression by murderous thugs? So our reaction to these events and the narrative that the candidates drive, both before and after the events happen, often determine these electoral events, electoral outcomes. But for the benefit of the country, I hope this does become an issue next year. I think it's really important. Like I said, I was not really that aware of the mandates until I started talking to my client. And especially since the vast majority of global electric vehicle battery and mineral production is made in China. Another group of what could be
right.
Just can't allow them to maintain this type of control over our economy.
Exactly. And as a pollster, the fact that like you said, you're non-biased. You want to provide a fair read, so you can get the actual information out. But you talk about these you mentioned China, the Congo, okay, slave labor. Now the reason that and we've had the gentleman there who videoed everything, Siddharth Kara, on the program. These are important factors when there's so many, in regards to education. Okay. And like one thing that we always say on the show, Trevor, is we support electric vehicles. No question about it. I mean, if you want an electric vehicle, please buy one, and if the whole world decides to go out and buy one, and and by all means do it. But
if I could afford one, I'd get one.
Right. I'm right with you 100%. But I'm just saying that, putting a gun to somebody's head and saying you're buying one. Okay. And it's like, taking one oxygen, a bottle of oxygen down at the bottom of the ocean and saying, this is what you're going to use to get to the top, even though you're going to run out potentially halfway up. And so it's a mandate. And so when we talk about that and when we actually look at the facts, okay, so Governor Youngkin tried to repeal the car ban earlier this year, but his bill died in the Senate by one vote. Do you think the legislators are going to have to potentially confront this issue? And we talked about, is it going to be a factor in the upcoming elections? But will they in Virginia confront the issue again? As a talking point in the upcoming election? I agree with you with the craziness going on in the world. It's certainly that depends on that. But imagine that, things, obviously, God willing, we will be able to overcome what's going on in Israel right now. And, so let's just think that, there's not going to be a crazy media story of that level before the elections. Will they confront this level, this discussion in Virginia?
So I'll tell you, Virginians in these districts, they really approve of the job the governor's done. He was above 50%, 54%. Again, these aren't like not competitive. These are very competitive districts, Senate districts. And they also, these constituents, when they're made aware of the law, they heavily oppose it. So I think this combination suggests legislators will have to face this issue, and those that get elected will as well. So again, at their own potential peril this fall, if they are not on the side of supporting constituent wishes, they could be in trouble.
And so having said that, we got a couple minutes left. So let's spit fire, if you will. Has there been any national polling that you've seen on this issue?
Somewhat. So Gallup, I have a few nationals. Gallup asked in March this year how much adults are considering buying electric vehicles. 4% of those adults own, 12% are seriously considering, 43% might consider, and 41% would not buy. Pew asked something similar in July this year, found that half of adults are not likely to consider. I think it was 52%, 53%, while 38% are considering buying one. Where you see this issue of mandates pop up are in the state polls. So Maryland, for instance, there was a poll in June this year, and that's not a Republican hub in the country. 60% of voters in that state oppose a plan to mandate electric car sales by 2035. New Jersey, very similar type of state to Maryland. A survey just last month found that 58% of voters oppose that same type of mandate. And even in Delaware, a poll from February this year, 65% oppose a mandate, with 47% strongly opposing.
Wondering what our policymakers are thinking of these numbers. Okay, is it changing positions in regards to if this comes up on a vote? Okay, our political leaders, as our public gets educated, are they listening? And will they? And the fact that it could come up, and this could be very impacting. Because people feel that there are other issues that are more important that we should be focusing on other than EV mandates. You think the policy makers are listening?
So there's a couple of rules that I like to follow. If a legislator gets 10 calls about an issue, then they start freaking out, a state legislator. I've done that here in Maryland and Nevada. I've done it in a lot of places where I've irritated legislators. I also think that that legislators listen when they don't get elected. So those people so if there's political consequences, electoral consequences, I think that's far more valuable than the legislative fights. I mean, you have to get the people in there. They're going to vote the right way on this issue.
So we got about 30 seconds left. Would you expect similar findings if you polled other swing states or swing districts? Or is Virginia unique in this issue?
Yeah, so Virginia is a swing state. I mean, it's leaning more. I mean, with Trump these last 6 years, it's definitely leaning more blue. But Delaware is not a swing state. Maryland's not a swing state. In New Jersey, although they had a close election, it's definitely not a swing state, at least right now. I think California, being the way California is, it's a plus 30 type of state, where Maryland and New Jersey are a little bit closer and Delaware is a little bit closer. I think even blue states, I think it's an issue in blue states, as that polling just showed in those states.
So yes or no, the U.S. House took a vote on this issue a few weeks ago. Given what you're seeing in Virginia, do you think this issue could come up in the 2024 elections?
Yeah, again, I don't know what's going to happen next year, and I think world events really drive this stuff. I want this to be an issue, though, so I'm gonna do my best to make it one.
So, Dr. Trevor Smith, Chief Research Officer, WPA Intelligence, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. We appreciate your insight, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. We'll have more from the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey in just a minute.
My name is Eleanor Northaft. My husband was in the union, Local 282. And as I'm getting older, I would like somebody to fight for me. So I called up Retiree First.
Hi.
And I got Brooke.
So nice to meet you. I'm Brooke. I'm an advocate at Retiree First. I've been working with Eleanor for 3 years. She was one of my first calls. I helped her with transportation to her doctors, getting her glasses reimbursed.
Oh, they are pretty fancy.
I'm basically just answering any questions she has.
And I always have a lot of questions.
Not too many.
I have a friend there. I love it because I can depend on her to help me out in any situation.
Oh, I'm excited.
She always comes through for me.
Do you stream on a Roku, a Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app. Watch Action News live.
And the big story on Action News.
Plus special programming, breaking news, and severe weather updates.
Tremendous amounts of rain.
Always on. Always the news team you trust. Watch 6ABC 24/7 on your streaming device. Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.
Forget to tune in and go back and re-listen to today's edition of the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. JDoc, almost out of time here. I am going to put in the description link for those that tune into the show on YouTube or on the Labor and Energy Show website. I am going to put the link for Governor Glenn Youngkin's speech back to the state of the Commonwealth, which I heard you reference that. So I am going to list that link so people can go back and watch that clip that you were referencing in the show as well. I'll give you opportunity to close it up for us.
I just think that this conversation about electric vehicle mandates impacts our workforce. It impacts our public. They're unnecessary. Okay, we should be working together. I feel like a broken record, but you can expect a lot of conversation here because the decisions that are going to impact us tomorrow, and I mean it potentially in a huge way, are being made today. Okay, and people's voices have to be, like Mike Butler said, call your legislator and have your voice made on electric vehicle mandates. They impact our jobs, our energy security, so much about our life, our economy, and they're unnecessary. You want to buy an electric vehicle? Let's do it. Okay, it's a lot of great electric vehicles out there. However, we're making decisions right now that we're going to have a hard time living with down the road, and you must get educated on it because this will impact a large portion of our life. Not to mention the electric, our grid, our energy grid. So so much to talk about here, Joe, and we want to thank obviously Dr. Trevor Smith and Mike Butler for being our guests on the show. Just a really informative broadcast.
We live in a world where we are free. So I would strongly suggest that common sense eliminates the word mandate as far as this conversation is being said. That's going to do it for this edition of the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. Special thanks to Kateri for producing Behind the Glass. And as JDoc mentioned, special thanks to Mike Butler and also Dr. Trevor Smith for joining us. Stick around, more to come next week on the Labor and Energy Show with JDoc and Krausey. Until then, see you next time, everybody.
Welcome to Pond Lehocky, the largest workers' compensation law firm in Pennsylvania. With over 250 years of combined courtroom experience, we've helped over 100,000 injured and disabled workers obtain benefits, as well as some of the biggest settlements in the state. Even better, Pond Lehocky doesn't charge a dime until you win. If you've been injured at work, give Pond Lehocky a call.
The best way to describe Anthony, David, and Jan are that they're my brothers. I met Anthony at LA Fitness because I noticed that he had a Teamster's bag and his dad was a Teamster leader.
I'm a third-generation son of labor. My grandmother worked in a factory. My mother and father were both Teamster members. I don't think there's a trade that I don't have a family member in.
What's so big for me coming from a union background is what affects one member affects the entire membership.
A lot of people can relate to the issues that individuals deal with. We pride ourselves on empathy.
The big value that's always instilled in you if you grow up in a union household is the importance of brotherhood. People that lean on each other, that rely on each other.
When we were building this business, having that background and knowing what matters most to the union members is really what we use to drive and build out Retiree First.
Do you stream on a Roku, Fire Stick, Google TV, or Apple TV? Now you can watch 6ABC 24/7 with the 6ABC Philadelphia streaming app.
And the big story on Action News.
Search 6ABC Philadelphia and start streaming today.